It is so good to be back here in the meeting house to speak. I look forward to our gradual emerging and the ability of more and more people to be with us in person. It is such a beautiful and warm day here in New York, getting up to almost 80 today, even though it's October 4th. My talk today has a weird title, The Power of Muy. I'm sure when many saw the title, you thought that it might be a typo, but it is not. Muy. What does Jone mean by muy? Well, I borrow the term and many ideas that I'll speak about today from Daniel J. Siegel, MD, whose work has been to bring insights from understanding the mind itself and how it works to fields like counseling, teaching, coaching, and self-development. One of the most basic aspects of the mind's processing is simple awareness or consciousness. Just for a moment, let your mind be conscious of what you are seeing in the room that you're in. If you're in the meeting room, there's me. If you're on Zoom, you have a computer screen or phone or tablet where you're seeing me. You might see this tan block in front of me. Maybe some candles are showing in the screen. And you can also shift your attention in the meeting room to the windows above me and to the sides, where you can see green filling those windows. Your mind is probably naming those as leaves on trees. At home, you see other objects you have names for, and you can just experience seeing them beyond naming them mentally. The same with sounds or touch. Here in the room, we have a young guest who is making little noises. It's wonderful. And touch, can you feel the surface where your hand is resting? Same with smells and tastes. You can be aware through your senses. Yesterday, I was here in this same room for a concert. I could hear the beautiful sounds of a cello and piano and the sounds of voices in the rooms. I could see the hands of the musicians moving quickly to make their notes. I could see who was in the room. I could feel the chair where I was sitting. Briefly, I had a cough drop in my mouth yesterday, and I could touch, taste, and smell that cough drop. Well, beyond the five senses, we are also able to be aware of our own bodies, the internal signals of our bodies. Maybe your back or legs are a little stiff right now. Maybe if you are very still, you can feel your guts rumbling or your heart beating. Yesterday, near the end of the concert, I could feel my body becoming weary of sitting, all the signs internally of a bit of discomfort. And your mind also has feelings, by which I mean here emotions, and it has thoughts, and both are racing around all the time, whether we're aware of them or not. I asked you earlier to check in on your feelings and thoughts about the story, to become aware of them. Awareness of our feelings and thoughts is a separate mental process from having the feelings and thoughts. When we have feelings or thoughts that we don't bring into awareness, those feelings can sometimes overwhelm us. Those thoughts can inform our actions even if we're not aware of it. We can act on feelings and thoughts without being aware. Awareness of our thoughts and feelings is something that we develop as we mature, developmentally and psychologically. I found myself at the concert, for instance, about 2 minutes into the concert, the first piece, with tears in my eyes. And so my brain did a quick check-in on what was going on. Well, for one thing, I was overwhelmed in a positive way with the experience of being in this room with about 25 people. For another, it was being caught up in the beauty of the music, something beyond just the sound, and something different when you're in the same room where it's being made. And our minds can go back and forth between these different kinds of awareness. At one point, I noticed that both the pianist and the cellist were using iPads and no paper for their music. My brain said, how do those pages turn? I moved my eyes around to see that there was some kind of gizmo that my brain labeled foot pedal that was on the floor in front of the cellist. I noticed that thought there. I could be aware in the moment that my labeling of it was a mental activity. I didn't really know what it was, but I could guess. A bright green light on it, I suddenly became aware of. Her feet were at that moment not touching the pedal, and I decided I was going to watch to see how she turned the page with her foot. And I failed in that attempt to focus my awareness. Other feelings and thoughts and the sensations of sound kept leading me back to awareness of the sights of the instruments and the sounds of the music, the sight of the instruments, the players, their hands and fingers. And when my mind wandered back to the idea of the foot pedal again, I tried watching. And again, I was distracted. That is, my mind moved to awareness of something else. And then even in that moment, part of my mind was aware of the irony of the other part of my mind, that I was going to talk about awareness today, and I wasn't even managing it very well. Awareness, that I was thinking about awareness. Our sense of self is tied to our awareness. The 5 usual senses about what is outside the body, the 6th sense of being aware of our own body from the inside, the 7th sense of being conscious and aware of our own thoughts and feelings, and even of our thoughts and feelings about our thoughts and our feelings. Those 7 senses are a large part of our understanding of ourself as separate from our surroundings, with ourself having independent thoughts and feelings that we have some control over, even if never complete control. And beyond that, we also have an internal awareness and sense of our inner connections with people and things outside our minds and outside of our bodies. Now, if you're now on Zoom or watching this in a recording later, if you've ever been in our meeting room, you probably have a memory of being there that you're now calling up almost as a sense of being here in the room right now. That is part of our inner sense of connection to something outside ourselves. Yesterday, before the concert, I turned around and talked briefly with some Riverdale Yonkers Society folks who were seated just behind me. And then when I had my tearful moment, part of it, I think, was also coming from that sensation of being in the same room with some people I care about. Different from being in the same room with just strangers. Even though these people were not in my sight range, I could feel the connection of them being in the room. And one person I know arrived after the concert started. And once I noticed her physically with the 5 senses, that sense of her also being in the room enriched my experience of the day, even when I wasn't looking at her. And then I also had a sense of connection with all the people in the room I didn't yet know, and a connection with everyone else in the world who might be experiencing a first time back at a live event. When a child is born, and I'm so thrilled we have a child here today, since I'm talking about kids. When a child is born, we can't really know what is going on in that child's mind except indirectly, through behavior. I remember when my son Jacob's first son, Robert, was born, and I was lucky enough to be able to be with Robert and his parents for most of Robert's first week of his life. Kids grow incredibly in 1 week. I remember watching his eyes at one moment look around, focus on people in the room more than on other objects that moved. And at one point late in that week, I was holding Robert while his mother took a nap and his father was at work. Robert looked up at my face, and then he looked at Bill's face. Bill was sitting in a nearby chair, and then back and forth a few times. And then I could see his face registering some satisfaction. I suspect he had had the insight in that moment that there were 2 people there, and they were both people, and he could tell them apart. At just a week old, he registered a kind of sense of satisfaction with himself, probably from that recognition in his brain that he'd learned something brand new. Awareness of his own thoughts and feelings long before he had words to express them. His face was registering so much of it. Babies move from recognizing faces to beginning to recognize how their own actions can change the faces of others. Their smile can get an adult to smile. What power. Their cry of hunger brings a bottle to them. What power they have. For infants in the first weeks of life, we now know it is so important that they get a sense of how their actions produce appropriate responses from the people in their world, that they get a sense of connection. Not just that there are other people in the world, but that their actions and what comes next are connected. It is part of brain development, part of developing a healthy sense of self. Babies who live with people who don't respond to their basic needs by fulfilling them, whether that's food, dry diapers, eye contact, caring voices and touch, those babies, we have long known, grow up with more challenges emotionally and psychologically. Caregivers, whether they're parents, grandparents, or unrelated people, literally shape the brains and minds of babies so that as babies grow, they can feel more at home in the world. They can care for others and maybe someday parent their own children well. Well, I counted off 7 senses earlier: sight, sound, touch, smell, taste, awareness of our internal body, awareness of our own thoughts and feelings. This sense of being interconnected with what is outside of us is our 8th sense. And it also builds our sense of self, who we are. In the natural evolution of life, we don't know what kind of awareness a virus might have, though I notice we occasionally depict the coronavirus as having intentions of its own. Viruses don't need intention to infect you. They just travel along on surfaces or through the air, and they get picked up and breathed in. But as life forms get more complex, there's a lot more need to organize to get the basic needs of life met. And so animals had to have something like the 5 senses to navigate the world successfully. Lizards, among other animals, have those 5 senses. But do they have thoughts and feelings? Probably not, and I'll tell you in a minute why I think so. And lizards, an old saying among neuroscientists goes, make terrible parents. The babies and parents of lizards don't have the kind of sense of interconnections I've been describing for humans. Though bees and ants are social, and thus there's probably an awareness of something outside of themselves, it may just be the outside of themselves they're aware of and not self. Maybe they're like the Borg of Star Trek. They're just conscious of being part of a whole. Are they aware of being individuals? We have no evidence for it. I recommend, for instance, that Star Trek, there's a 2-part episode playing off the idea that one Borg unit suddenly becomes conscious of it being an independent self. It's well worth watching as a philosophical exploration of what self and connection mean to human beings. Well, in evolving to even more complexity beyond lizards, mammals developed the neocortex, which allows, to a greater or lesser extent, an awareness of thoughts and feelings and of interconnections. That neocortex doesn't exist in viruses, lizards, or ants or bees. Maybe there's another kind of awareness they have that we don't understand, and because we can't even imagine it. But it isn't the same kind of consciousness awareness we have, because science can root that awareness in the neocortex. When connections to the neocortex are severed, or certain parts of the neocortex are damaged, we can be missing one or another of those kinds of awareness. Antonio Damasio, another neuroscience scientist, talks about the case of one patient he saw who had brain damage from an accident. He went from being a kind person who understood the social graces to being rude and antisocial. His therapist found that that person could describe accurately a situation he was in, and he could articulate what the consequences would be if he acted outside of social conventions. He also could articulate what the social conventions were. But something in his brain was missing with his brain damage, because he could no longer sense the connection between his thoughts and actions on one side, his thoughts and feelings on one side, and his actions in the environment. He had largely lost the eighth sense, and Daniel Siegel's description of that sense. Even if we have the equipment in our minds to be aware of this, our social connections shape how they develop. Our ability to sense interconnection, for instance, starts that first week of life and continues to grow and get more complete, at least through the teenage years. If we have parents and caregivers who don't really connect, we may develop more slowly or not fully in some areas, and then maybe even become parents who aren't really connecting with our children, creating a cycle. Or we might live in a culture where little boys are not taught to value or notice feelings. Who teaches them that? Slightly older boys. We're in a culture where preteen girls learn not to value or express their thoughts. In both cases, social interconnections influence individual development, which then influences social interactions more. Or we might live in a culture in which people with lighter colored skin are more valued than those with darker colored skin. We are taught to be hyper aware in that culture of skin color, more than, for instance, eye color. We sense ourselves through the social experience of hearing about this and learning about this from others, that we are part of one group, and we act on that, reinforcing for ourselves and others the idea that skin color is important. It's a reinforcing cycle. We create history and laws and culture, and then those support the sense that we are more connected to some people than to others. Race, we know, has no biological reality. And when the categorization into races helped people who had power, then there was a reinforcement of that categorization. And the categorization came to have real life effects, including how people sense their connection to others. When we are the targets of something like racism or sexism or other group oppressions, a part of our reaction normally to this is, I'm being treated as part of a we and not as me. The me is missing when I'm being treated like this. For the child who doesn't get love and care and empathy from the beginning, their reality is that it's an uncaring, unwelcoming world. And they will act in their lives as if that's true, and that helps to build an uncaring, unwelcoming world. Their world isn't safe, and they build metaphorical protective structures to keep themselves safe, including finding it hard to connect to their own children, unless they've managed to find other caring and welcoming connections later. Well, what is wrong here? Not only is that child not getting a full sense of we, of interconnection, they're actually not being treated as a me either by those who are caring for them. We and me are interconnected and are both crucial for our full development. For a child who gets love and care and empathy from the very beginning, and whose later experiences are of such interconnections, they will act as if the world is caring and welcoming, and they will be more empowered within that world and help to create such a world. Such children are both a me and part of a we, which is why songs like the ones we started with are important. This is one world. They describe not only reality, the world is one world full of diversity, but also a mental reality that not everyone shares. For some, the world is two or more worlds. Usually it's two, us and them. and we are only really connected to the us. Political polarity is becoming, in the USA and in much of the world, today part of self-identity. Sometimes we wonder, for instance, why more people don't seem to vote their economic interests, their long-term survival interests. Several recent surveys have shown how this works. On actual issues, people may align more with one of the two major parties than the other. And of course, a lot of people have positions on issues that aren't really encompassed by either of the major two parties. But even so, if your ideas align more with one party than the other, logic says you would vote with that party. And yet statistics show that many do not. They vote with the other party. Why? Because their identity, the sense of where they belong, their sense of interconnection gets tied up to the party identification. Party then becomes like race. It becomes part of personal identity. The us group that is our friends opposed to the them group that is our enemy. And the more stronger that sense of us and them gets, the more likely our group will treat the other group as subhuman, not entitled to respect of their individual worth. They lose a meanness, except within their own group. And that reinforces the separation and polarity. This summer, I gave 2 talks on what I consider, on a more philosophical level, to be the essence of ethical culture: individual worth and infinite interconnection. And of course, those 2 are also related to my message today. Both individuality and a sense of individual self and a sense of connection are built into our human brains. Each of us is a me, unique and irreplaceable. Each of us is also a part of a we, multiple we's. The human community, the natural world, the universe, we are me and we at the same time. And I would go one step further. The me and we are not 2 different modes of being. They are integrated. We never become fully our best individual self without being part of a we. The me and the we are one. I'll quote Dan Siegel here. We care for our internal identity as a me, while also embracing the reality of our interconnected identity as a we. A simple way to remember this important integrated identity is thinking of ourselves as a we, MWE, a fundamentally related being that we can be proud to call human. That's Dan Siegel. What would our world be like if we lived in a world of we's instead of one in which some value the me and not the we, and others value the we and not the me? My suggestion for this week: practice awareness, all 8 senses. Come to the New Moon Gathering on Zoom Tuesday evening, where we'll have an opportunity to do that in a guided way, or do it on your own. Awareness, practice awareness of what the 5 senses tell us. Awareness of what your body tells you. Awareness of what your thoughts and feelings are, beyond having the thoughts and feelings, awareness that you're having them. And awareness of your interconnection with others, whether in the same space or separated by time and distance. Practice sensing the connection with others near you. Sense your connection with your community. Try extending that to the whole country, the whole world, from there to all life. Try to make that an awareness, not just a thinking experiment. Be aware, not just of your sights and sounds, your memories and your thoughts, your imagination of people you've never met, but aware of the connection that you have. I invite you then this week to actually experience your we-ness. I'll say goodbye now to those watching this later on recording, and invite you to attend one of our in-person or Zoom meetings to get a more complete experience of ethical community.